Okay, I'm going to get us started. And then one last reminder to everyone, if you can please mute yourselves during this presentation, that would be great. My name is Sharon Pertelli. I'm the Executive Director and Registrar at ARIDO. I recognize some names in the participant list, so it's great to see many of you here that I've met previously. And for those who are new, if I haven't met you yet, I look forward to hopefully meeting you in the future and or helping to support your path as far as your next steps. A reminder that this meeting is really to walk you through the interior design experience requirement, which is a new supervised work experience requirement that ARIDO has launched. What I'm going to do is actually walk you through several components. I'm actually going to start you with a really quick overview as to why the change from an hours-based experience reporting system to the new, I would say, competencies-based reporting system. I'm then going to walk you through what it is, what it looks like, what do you need to know about it as it impacts many of you who are either students or intern members, as you try to figure out your next steps along the path to becoming a qualified interior designer. I'm then going to walk you through the transition plan. So what is next for you? What decisions do you have to make? And what steps are required? And then the last piece is I will open it up for, I'll start off with some FAQs before I open it up for questions. But as I'm presenting, feel free, if you have a question in the moment, feel free to either pop that question in the chat box. And I will go through them following the FAQ section, and or at the end of the session, and after I've gone through all of the questions in the chat box, I will open it up for any discussion or any verbal questions that you'd like to ask. I do find sometimes there is a bit of a dialogue that is required to either answer your question, and that means perhaps I'm asking for some additional information to ensure that I fully understand what you're asking. But I also find sometimes the question that you might ask verbally versus when you put it in the chat box actually connects with some of the other participants who are on the call listening. And sometimes it's really great to just hear the dialogue and the question being shared at that time verbally. And I see, perfect. I see there's a couple of comments coming in already, which is great. So we will continue. So why the change? Really big question that I'm going to assume many of you are asking at this time. Really, it starts from the work that we have been doing with the OAA, the Ontario Association of Architects. Some of you will already know that since 2016, we've been working towards a partnership with the OAA, and that was in response to Ontario government advising us that they would support additional regulations, so going beyond just the protected title of interior designer, if we were to work with the OAA and work with the Architects Act in Ontario. And so as we began that development work with the OAA, there were several components that were being discussed over the last, I would say, 3 years. The first was that we were really pleased to hear from the OAA once they had an opportunity to review the minimum education requirement, which is a CETA degree, the supervised training requirement, and then the NCIDQ exam in order for one to become registered or qualified. They had accepted those 3 requirements. For the most part, the exam and the CETA accreditation for the degree was enough for them. It was the minimum standard that they believed could support the future model. While they supported the supervised work experience requirement, one of the comments that we received back from the OAA was that because within the hours-based reporting system, that report of supervised work experience hours goes directly to CIDQ. in order to qualify to write the exam. ARIDO really has no say in amending that reporting, in what the review looks like on an ongoing basis, and we really are not engaged for any input on areas to improvement. So there is a really big accountability piece that the OAA had flagged for us and said, you know, in the future model, ARIDO will be the organization that actually makes sure every candidate for licensing and for qualified status is meeting the requirements. And so the flag that they had kind of raised for us was around the hours-based reporting system, and that ARIDO really didn't have appropriate accountability or oversight to it, because it was something that CIDQ had built and that ARIDO had adopted. And so that conversation led to looking at a new improved supervised reporting requirement. When we started the development work in 2019, there were two key goals and objectives, actually three, that we wanted to align with. One was aligning with the competencies of the intern competency review system. And that is something that is for non-traditional candidates, meaning they are not coming to ARIDO with a CETA accredited degree. They could be individuals who graduated from education internationally from another country who are newcomers to Canada. It could also be individuals who have, I would say, 20 or so years of experience, may have obtained a 2-year diploma or a 3-year diploma at that time, and then have 20 or so years of work experience. So they would be considered a non-traditional candidate because they're not a recent graduate. And so the ICERIS is a competencies-based review system where we assess candidates' competencies, and they would demonstrate that through what's called a book of evidence, and that essentially is a portfolio that they put together for our review based on education and then experience. So knowing where we are headed with the OAA in the future model, it was really important that the competencies of the ICERIS could kind of be the first step, and then the second step would be the supervised work experience requirement. And when you kind of bring the two of them together, they actually create one new requirement when the regulation comes in for those non-traditional candidates. Meaning if a newcomer to Canada is coming from, say, Dubai, and they have that 20-year experience, because the competencies of the ICERIS and then the new requirement are aligned, that person goes through the first two together very seamlessly, and then they would go on to write the exam. So one piece was aligning with the competencies because we had already mapped them to the interior design scope of work. The other two big objectives that we wanted to accomplish in overhauling the supervised work experience requirement was what we hear from intern members quite often is that they're really not sure how to go about getting their experience. There really hasn't been a roadmap to date. And I'm going to actually do a little quick, I'll show you a little quick snapshot of the hours-based reporting so that I can walk you through why that has not served as an appropriate roadmap, meaning it hasn't really given guidance to students and interns as to what experience do you need. And so we really thought it would be fantastic if whatever we ended up developing would actually serve as an appropriate roadmap so that intern members felt empowered. They felt that they knew exactly what experience they had to get, and that they would be able to introduce that roadmap in a very open dialogue with their supervisors throughout their career path. And that way, this would just help to facilitate how that supervisor then gives appropriate training to our intern members. The other piece of feedback that we have heard pretty consistently over the last 10 years from registered members who are running design firms is that they could hire two completely different interns, and those interns could come from very different experience backgrounds, including experience in different firms. And what they're finding is that there is inconsistency in the way that our interns are being trained, because there hasn't been a roadmap that everybody could really use. And so as we were developing this new requirement, what we really also wanted to do was build that level playing field and that foundation of moving forward those interns who start to use this new requirement reporting piece. It means that every intern is getting the exact level or exposure to experience and training. And so what a great way to build that level playing field if we were to follow the development of a bit of a roadmap for both interns and then the supervisors who are responsible for ensuring that those interns and students get the appropriate training. So moving on, I wanted to give a little bit of a snapshot of the ICERIS. So this is a 40,000-foot drop into the ICERIS assessment. The top 8 kind of areas of competencies are the reason I really wanted to share this with you, so that you can understand what we aligned this new requirement with. So there are 8 primary competency buckets within the ICERIS. And then within each bucket, there are a series of subset skills and knowledge sets. And so what this means is, in order for us to assess whether or not somebody who's not coming to ARIDO with a seated degree, we're actually able to use this assessment based on these 33 competencies to determine if they have the equivalency of a seated degree graduate, meaning the competencies, the knowledge, and the foundational pieces, in order to then move on to the next step, which is supervised work experience requirement. And so we actually used this as a roadmap and built the next series of pieces that would fit within each of these bucket areas. And so that kind of speaks to, when you bring ICERIS and this new requirement together and butt them up against each other, it actually can be one full assessment in its entirety for those who are those non-traditional candidates. But then at the same time, the new requirement can actually support and be that roadmap for interns and student members at the same time. This is a really quick snapshot of the existing supervised work experience form. And as you can see, this was hours-based. And essentially what you do with this form is that you, for each of these design phases, you basically enter the number of, you enter a total number of hours, and then you check off which of these design phases you obtain experience in. So as a student or as an intern who is undertaking their supervised work experience, this really doesn't tell you much. So what does programming mean? What is included in programming? What are all of the required pieces that you should be getting as experience within programming, schematic design, design development, etc. This really was up to every individual supervisor to determine it, and there was no real identified path how to get there. And what I will do now is walk you through the new requirements. And what this looks like is a series of tasks that have been identified for each of the design phases. And this is pre-design, design phase 1. On the right-hand side, you can actually see the competencies that I referred to. There's really nothing you need to do with those competencies. It's really just a roadmap for you and your supervisor to understand why we've mandated this task and then which competency areas it aligns with. On the left-hand side, you can see each of the tasks that we have identified. So the way this form works is it is not hours-based. The way that ideally you obtain your or successfully complete this is, as you obtain your supervised work experience, there will be what we recommend as ongoing check-in meetings and supervisory meetings where you and your supervisor are reviewing your work to date on all the projects that you're working on. And then these tasks become that roadmap for you. So if you are currently working on, say, a retail space, and you are doing certain tasks as part of the team, your supervisor who is supervising your work should be able to identify, one, which of these tasks you have completed and have had exposure to, and two, how you were doing. And in those ongoing check-in meetings, your supervisor should be able to give you direction. So if we were to look at 1.1 research client or project type, you would go over, if you did that work for this project, the supervisor would review it, they would give you feedback. That feedback goes into the relevant notes section. The relevance notes section, and you would continue to do that task on several projects over a period of time until your supervisor says, you know what, you've done this enough times now that I know you're fully capable and competent in doing it. For some individuals, some of these tasks, you might get through them pretty quickly within, 3 or 4 or 5 projects, where your supervisor is saying, you've really excelled at this, you've built up your skills in this area. I am now going to sign off on 1.1, and I'm going to consider you having met this task. So your supervisor then would check this as complete and would enter their initials here. And then at that point, they could also change the notes if they want to, as far as, encouraging notes around, you do this really well, keep that up when executing this task. And so they would do this for all of the tasks within the reporting form. And as I mentioned, there are no hours associated with this. So some individuals may get through this quicker than others, depending on the exposure they're getting and the type of experience, and then also their supervisor and the feedback. Some might need a little bit longer, and that's okay. There really is no pressure with respects to time. The key thing is that you are getting the right exposure, the right supervision in all of the mandated tasks. And the reality is, on any one given project, you might be going through 20 or 30 of these tasks between the start of the project to the end of the project, to its completion. And so there is an opportunity to continue to build on that growing and on that learning with every project that you work on. So that's essentially the form and how you report it. And so as you can see with these tasks, if you feel that you are not, say, getting an exposure to 1.4, which is identifying stakeholders, the great thing I think about this new requirement is it actually, number one, it empowers you to be able to identify that as a gap. I think with the hours-based piece, which I had showed you earlier, this really doesn't identify for you, so how do you get all of the programming experience or schematic design? It's very broad and very ambiguous, and it's all going to come down to the supervisor that is determining what those tasks and exposure of experience should be. With the new requirement, it actually empowers you to be able to track everything and then go to your supervisor and say to your supervisor, I haven't had any exposure in these 3 areas. And then the second piece is the great thing for you is that ARIDO is mandating this. So you actually get to put it on us. You get to say to your supervisor, ARIDO has said that I need this experience in all of these tasks in order for me to continue to progress to getting qualified. So it takes the pressure off of you. It actually hopefully allows you to have a much easier approach and conversation with your supervisor. I know in speaking to some of you that can be really intimidating to determine, how do I approach this conversation with my supervisor, and how do I open up that dialogue around, I don't feel like I'm getting experience in all of the same areas, or I feel like I'm doing all of the same tasks, but I know that some of my team members are getting experience in other areas. Like, when does that start for me? The really great thing I think about this new requirement is it's going to be able to empower you to put it on ARIDO and say, I've been told I need to get this, all of this experience. And what we believe will end up happening is that you will get a more robust and kind of inclusive exposure to all of the areas that you should be getting during your supervised work experience journey. The one thing I will mention, and you can see it on this page, is that essentially all of the tasks that are in black font are mandatory, meaning you need to successfully complete them in order to meet the requirement. Anything in red are some tasks that the development group identified in which they had said these would be really great areas of experience for any intern member or student member. But we also recognize that some of these tasks could be dependent on whether or not the firm engages in them. And 3D renderings are a really great example. You know, some design firms may be, they should be, most of them will be kind of starting to work in 3D renderings. But some design firms, depending on the work they do, might not, or depending on the projects that they work on, 3D renderings might not really be necessary. But if there is an opportunity to expose you to that, then it is a bit of a flag for your supervisor that ARIDO has identified it as a useful piece of experience. So now I'd like to walk you through a little bit of a comparison between the current hours-based requirement and then the new, what we're calling IDER, the Interior Design Experience Requirement. And you can see a bit of a separation of the two. On the left-hand side, you can see under this CIDQ requirement, and most of you will be familiar with this at this point in your career path. Anyone who's got a degree as far as your minimum education, and that is regardless if it's CETA accredited or not, you're required under that reporting to obtain 3,520 hours. Up to 1,760 hours of experience can be earned before education is complete, but it cannot be the same hours of experience that you used if the program you were in had a co-op requirement. So if your program had a co-op requirement and say it was 400 hours, you cannot claim those 400 hours because they actually are required in order for you to graduate and obtain your degree. However, following those 400 hours, if that was the requirement for the co-op, you can actually start claiming your hours and your experience at that point. So anything after that co-op or work experience requirement for the design program, you can actually start reporting. If you graduated with a diploma program, a 3-year diploma, you are required under the CIDQ requirement to obtain 5,280 hours, and all of that work experience has to be accumulated after you graduate. For the most part, most of the 3-year diplomas did not have a co-op requirement, and so that's why all of the work experience has to be obtained post diploma graduation. On the right-hand side, you'll see IDER, and IDER is really straightforward. It is, again, not hours-based. It is a series of mandatory tasks for each of the design phases listed. And you basically have to complete all of the mandatory tasks. It's as simple as that. It could take some individuals a year and a half to do, again, depending on the amount of experience, the amount of exposure, and then the supervisor really also utilizing those tasks as a roadmap to give you the right experience. It could take a little bit longer, but really it comes down to how much exposure are you getting and how often are you getting it at the end of the day in order for you to get to a place where you are now fully competent in that task. To break it down a little further, when we look at the CIDQ requirement, there was a stipulation around who your supervisor could be. And then the value of the hours you completed. So if you were obtaining your supervision under a registered member of ARIDO or a registered member under another provincial body, an NCIDQ certificate holder who meets ARIDO's requirements, or a licensed architect, all of the hours you obtained actually qualify for 100% of their value. So 1 hour can be qualified for 1 hour. If you are working for a designer who does not fit within one of those top 3 categories, then you can actually claim 75% of those hours. So for every hour that you accumulate, you're only able to report 75% of that hour, so 0.75. And then the remaining 25% of your full hours actually has to be under the supervision of one of those top 3 individuals. On the IDER side, where we are going in the future with IDER is that it must be a registered member of ARIDO or a licensed architect. However, during the launch of this, starting January 1st, actually starting immediately through until December 31st, 2023, we're actually going to be in a phase of the launch of IDER, which we are calling field review. And what that means is for any of you who are not currently under the supervision of a registered member or a licensed architect, we will actually accept your IDER reporting. We may ask from you and your supervisor some more information about your supervisor and their qualifications. The reason for that is during these first 2 years of field testing and field review, we actually want to monitor everything and see if this actually needs to be expanded. So right now, this is where we're sitting, is where we think IDER is going as far as who has to be the supervisor. But we are not closing this off to any of you who are being supervised by somebody who is not currently a registered member or licensed architect. And the reason for that is we actually want to obtain your tasks. We want to get to know more of who is supervising you if they're not under one of those 2. And then we're going to review them on a case-by-case basis and then use that data during those first 2 years of field review and field testing. And then that data that we collect might actually result in one of 2 things. An amendment to some of the tasks if we think we need to adjust some of the tasks, and or possibly some other areas of supervisor demographics that we might also be able to accept. So if you're in this presentation or viewing this recording and think because you are not either supervised by a registered member or a licensed architect, that you cannot go into IDER, that's not the case. That's where we're moving eventually, but you can actually apply IDER to your work experience reporting. We'll want to know more about your supervisor, and that just helps us to really continue to build this program and make sure that it is robust enough. And that means possibly looking at other types of supervisors that may qualify in the future. So as far as next steps, essentially, we've been holding webinars starting in September through to December 2021. So our last webinar is next month before the holidays. If you have any colleagues or peers who you know that this change in requirement might also impact, and if you find this useful, I would ask you to please encourage them to either go to this recording when it's available or attend the December session, or even just reach out to ARIDO directly. The other thing you need to understand is that we're looking for everyone to report to us which path that they have taken. So from October 1st to the end of this year, we're just asking every intern member to basically make a choice. Let us know if you wish to continue in the hours-based reporting, or if you'd like to move into IDER, and we will actually make a note in your record so that we can just be able to support you fully along your journey, and then just be able to track where everyone is at and which path they are taking. And then the last thing is just keep working towards your experience. Once you've chosen a path, keep getting your experience, keep doing your reporting, whether it is hours-based or IDER, that will be your choice, but then continue to work towards your next steps. And then one question that I thought would be likely applicable to most of you, or that what you are considering as you're listening to this is, what's the right path for me? Which one should I choose? I'm going to get into that a little more in depth. I have some case scenarios in the FAQ section that I think will help you to identify what is the best path for you. But a couple of considerations that I wanted to make is that you are all in a really different place of your experience journey. No two interns go through the same path, the same experience in any way, shape, or form. So this really isn't about a one size fits all, which is why we're allowing everyone to pick whether you stay in the hours-based or whether you move into IDER. Several of you are going to come from very different experiences to begin with, how you started right out of graduation, the different firms or companies or even projects that you've worked on. So there really is no standard kind of solution or answer for all of you. This really comes down to you making an individual decision for yourself as to what is the best next step. And then just a reminder is that we just need to know from you by the end of this year which path you will be taking. And then just a quick overview again of the requirement before I move on. For the hours-based requirement, if you were a graduate of a degree, regardless if it was CETA or not, it's 3,520 hours of work experience. 1,760 could only be earned post co-op requirement. And then if anyone on this call is a graduate of a diploma program, all of your experience hours, which is 5,280, needed to be accumulated post-graduation. And some of the questions we've been receiving from many of you is timeline or deadline. And we mentioned it in some of our FAQ documents. There is a deadline that is in existence from the date that you join as an intern, which is a 5-year deadline. And that 5-year deadline means that you're paying the standard intern dues within those 5 years, because we recognize when you join as an intern, there is an appropriate amount of time that we should be giving to you in order for you to move from intern to registered. When that 5-year deadline has lapsed, you traditionally move into what's called intern extended, and that means you just need more time to get your experience requirement and pass your NCIDQ exams to become registered. I wanted to raise this in these calls because we're actually re-examining it to make sure that it is fair, that it is appropriate. So what I wanted to mention today is do not stress about this deadline. I know, you know, the reality is some interns need a bit more time to get there. The pandemic is a really great example. A lot of individuals either were furloughed last year due to the halting of a lot of construction projects, the lack of supplies, and projects just really slowing down, that pipeline of new work slowing down. Some people are, you know, raising a family. So everything is going to be very different for every individual. So I wanted to mention today, do not stress out over the deadline. We are currently re-examining it, and we might be making some changes just to make sure that it is fair. We are re-reviewing it. Once we have completed that review and made a decision, we'll hold a series of webinars just like this one to walk you through if there are any changes and or what do you need to know about that deadline. So right now, I'm just going to recommend that you just put the pause button on worrying about that deadline and just wait until early 2022 when we've completed our review and we have an update for you. Okay. Now, FAQs. So I've put together a series of case scenarios which I feel might apply to most of you. And I have a feeling once you've heard me kind of walk you through these scenarios, it might actually answer some of the questions that you might have. So the first question I was anticipating was, I have completed a substantial amount of my required experience, specifically supervised hours. So that hours-based program, do I need to transition to the new requirement? Do you need to transition to IDER? The answer I have for you is no. And if anything, if you have completed it, you're done. There is nothing left for you to do. You're likely, if you've completed your hours, you're likely now preparing for NCIDQ, you're good to go. The one thing I would do is just notify us by December 31st that that's the path you're choosing, because at some point you'll be reporting those hours to us if you haven't already done so. And then we'll just record your decision, and then you just keep moving on and preparing for your exams and continuing with the next steps. But if you've completed the hours, you're good to go. If you are really close, if you are like 75% close, or even if you are 60% completed and you just decide, I've started this path, I'm just going to complete the hours-based program, there is nothing wrong with that. Again, it's a personal decision. You need to decide what is best for you, what is best for your next steps. What I can recommend is that if you're going to keep the hours-based reporting, just reference IDER and just use that as a conversation piece with your supervisor to make sure that you're actually getting all of the right experience, because those tasks will also help you prepare for the exam at the end of the day. But you can absolutely stay in the hours-based reporting and then maybe just use the IDER tasks as a reference piece as you continue on obtaining your supervised work experience requirement. Another question I was anticipating is, I've been working for the same employer for most of my experience. Can I transition to the new IDER requirement, which is the task-based system? And if you are in that situation, absolutely you can. You can start using the self-reporting form. What I would do is have a preliminary meeting with your supervisor. The two of you can sit down and review all of the tasks, and your supervisor and you can kind of discuss, okay, what tasks are you proficient in? What have you successfully completed? And then have the supervisor sign off right there and there, right then and there, of all the tasks that you and them believe you've completed. And then the great thing about that is you might have a series of gaps where there are some tasks that you haven't identified you've completed. Well, now you've got a better handle of your roadmap and next steps. So identifying what you have completed and your supervisor signing off on it, and then seeing which tasks are left for you to kind of get exposure in is a great way then for you and your supervisor to discuss, okay, what is the strategy now for me to obtain the rest of this experience? What projects are ongoing that I can start to get this exposure in? What's coming down the pipeline as new projects that might be able to give me this exposure? It really then allows you to, as I said earlier, empower you just by being able to identify from a task-based perspective what's left for you to learn. And if anything, it'll just be a great way for you to make sure that you are getting all of the experience that you should be getting. Another question I was anticipating, I've worked for several employers and have already collected my hours-based system. Do I need to transition to the new IDER reporting requirement? No. If you've collected your hours, just remember that if you've worked for several different firms, CIDQ is going to require that for each employer, you have a separate form. So if you worked for design firm A for the first 1.5 years of your experience, you need to fill out one form with that supervisor signing off on it, and you only record the hours that you completed under their supervision for that first 1.5 years. And then as you continued with other employers, you get other individual forms signed off by those additional supervisors. That's the only recommendation I have for you, but you absolutely can stay in the hours-based system if you've either completed them under several employers or are very close to completing them, and then your experience history is just multiple employment exposures and then multiple employers signing off on them. Just a reminder, let us know by December 31st that you would like to stay in the new system. We'll record your decision and then you just keep plugging along. So alternative to this, if you have worked for several employers and are thinking of moving to IDER, just think really carefully about, are you still in touch with a former supervisor? Are you able to go back and get them to sign off on it? How long ago was that first experience? And will you and that supervisor be able to recall the experience that you had gotten so that they could sign off on the tasks. Just some things for you to consider as you're pondering what is the best pathway for you. Another question I was anticipating: for the new IDER program, can I start recording my evidence-based work while I'm still in school? The answer is yes, you can. But again, the experience that you need to complete your co-op hours cannot be double dipped. So you can't use them for both your minimum education requirement and your supervised work experience requirement. You have to kind of differentiate the two. But once you've completed the co-op hours, anything after that, you absolutely can start logging them using IDER. And there's no restrictions at all, okay? And the same rules apply. Once you've completed the task successfully and your supervisor is comfortable with, confident with signing off on it, you get them to sign off and you just continue along with the other tasks. If there are any interns on this call who completed the ICERS successfully and joined through the ICERS program, you might be considering, well, which is the best system for me? Essentially, it's the same thing. First off, you need to decide which is the best pathway for you. Should you continue with hours-based or should you jump into IDER? What we are stipulating is that any interns who joined after January 1st, 2021, so essentially this year, we're asking that you kind of move into IDER because you should be still with the same employer in that same exposure experience and should be able to transition quickly. Anyone who joined as an intern prior to January 1st, 2021, choose your path, whether it be hours-based or the IDER program, and then just go through that. Let us know by December 31st, we'll record it, and then you continue on. But for ICERS, it's in our eyes, once you've joined as an intern, regardless if you're a seated degree graduate or you've come in through ICERS, we consider interns all at the same level playing field. So just pick which one you'd like to do. And then depending on your start date, we are recommending if you joined post January 1st, 2021, that you consider moving into the IDER requirement. Another great question that I think will come up for those of you who may have come in through the ICERS. I submitted experience towards the ICERIS assessment. Can I use the same experience towards IDER? Essentially, ICERIS is that competencies-based assessment that really goes and takes a look at the competencies you've submitted for review and if they're equivalent to the minimum education, which is a seated degree. So really that evidence can be education, training, and work evidence accumulated through your early years of experience. The one thing I will mention is that for ICERS, the competencies are a very different level than experience requirement. ICERS really is that equivalency to when you were in school studying that foundational kind of interior design knowledge. Once you start accumulating supervised work experience, the levels of competencies that you start to gain at that experience level are very different because now you're working on real life projects in real life scenarios. So the competencies for ICERS are at a very different level than they are for IDER. It's more task-based versus what do you know and how do you demonstrate it? It's a very different competencies from that perspective. IDER is really about the competencies required to complete your mandatory tasks, and they're only ever obtained through in the field experience. And again, it's tasks that you have performed under a supervisor monitoring you, giving you feedback, helping you grow and learn in a variety and range of settings and for a number of times and through different projects. So this in the field training is really intended to build upon that first requirement, which is education. So that's something to think about if you came in through ICERIS and are trying to determine, which experience can you submit, and if it was also submitted towards the ICERIS assessment. And for those of you who fall into this situation, if it's still not clear, just give us a call and we'll help coach you over the phone and just make sure that we can help guide you at every turning point. Another question, does the process allow for multiple qualified supervisors to sign off? And that's for IDER. And the answer is yes. The same way you could submit several reporting forms under several different supervisors for the hours-based program, you can do that for IDER. What it means is just complete a separate reporting form for each different employment setting and each different supervisor. Because what will happen is when you submit that form, there is a supervisor profile piece that comes and that has to be completed by the supervisor and attached to your reporting form for IDER. So you should have one of each, a supervisor profile, and then your tasks for under just that supervisor together, and then you would supply multiple reporting forms for each supervisor to ARIDO, and then we will accept them all. We will do a review, make sure that within those multiple forms, you have received all of the experience that you should have. And then if we have any questions, we'll set up a call and just walk through it with you. But it is possible. Another question, I have had some personal issues related to keeping my experience on track. What are my options? Really simply, as I said before, all of you are not going to get to that end goal of qualified in the same pace or on the same path. So life does happen. We know that. There are allowances that exist where extenuating circumstances apply. And I used some earlier, like changes of employment, loss of employment. You might be on maternity or paternity leave. You might be going back to school to upgrade your education. There are so many different scenarios that could impact you keeping your experience on track. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I do recommend is that you stay in touch with us. Let us know so that we can work with you. Deadline extensions are possible when you fit into one of these areas. We just need communication. We need you to kind of let us know, keep us in touch, keep in touch with us, and then we'll guide you as to what your options are. I do recommend that they are one-on-one conversations because, again, this isn't a one-size-fits-all. You're all going to be going through different things, different experiences and exposures. So I highly recommend if you feel that this applies to you, reach out to us and then we'll have a conversation and guide you as best as we can so that you are successful at the end of the day. And so also so that you're not discouraged, because that's obviously not the intent of this or the requirement. It's really our job is to help you be successful at the end of the day in getting to that end goal of becoming qualified. Okay, so I'm going to take, I think that's pretty much it. I didn't have any other further content for you, and I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to go first to the chat box and just take a look at which questions are there and just go through them really quickly for you. And then what I'll do is once we've gone through all the questions in the chat box, I will ask if there is anyone who would like to unmute themselves and either ask a question or have a bit of a dialogue to flesh some of this out as well. So Clement had asked, I replied to the email. I'll be continuing with the old hour system. Should I stay on the webinar? Sorry, Clement, I didn't read it at the beginning, but I assume this was really helpful information for you, just to help you understand what do you do next in continuing with your hours-based reporting. Jessica is asking, how would this method work for a supervisor who is not accredited yet? I know with the hours-based method, we can only account for 75% of the hours. Is it similar in some way? So Jessica, no. So essentially, while we are moving towards an accredited supervisor, that is down the road for essentially from now until the end of 2023. If you're not being supervised by, if you're being supervised by a non-accredited person, we actually want you to, and if you want to use IDER, we will accept your reporting. We want to see those, that profile of that supervisor, because as I said earlier, we're going to be in what's called a field testing and field review period for most of 2022 and 2023. And we want to collect some of that alternative demographic information. It may actually help us evolve this program moving forward. Post 2023, I don't know yet. But if you're in the program and you sign up for IDER now, likely post 2023 will allow you continue. If you're under a non-accredited supervisor, it's anyone new joining after that, where they might have to have their experience through an accredited person. The other piece I will say, and this applies to both the hours-based reporting and IDER, if you feel that you've got to make up some experience, so whether it's that 75% hours, and then you need the remaining 25% to be under a qualified person, or even if your current supervisor is not, perhaps doesn't have the exposure to supervise you in some of the mandatory tasks, know that we have a mentorship program. And that mentorship program allows us to pair you up with a registered member, a qualified person. And that is a way to kind of make up any gaps that you might feel you have, where we actually can connect you. So IDER can be used under a mentorship system, meaning if you're being mentored by a registered member and they're not your direct, I would say, work or employment supervisor, you can actually report those hours too towards your work experience if you're using the IDER tasks. The other thing is, if you're in the hours-based program, CIDQ calls it sponsorship. They don't call it mentorship. But if you were to take advantage of ARIDO's mentorship program, get kind of paired up with a registered member, and they were to supervise you, those supervision hours through that mentorship would qualify for 100% value of those hours under what's called sponsorship for the CIDQ hours. So you've actually, all of you, regardless of what you pick, you have some options there. So Jessica, I hope that has answered the question. Feel free to elaborate if there's anything else. And then I'll keep going down the chain of questions. Leia's asking, how does this apply to people who have been working in the industry for the past 4 years and have all of the hours? If you've completed the hours, you're good to go. There's nothing for you to do. If you're working on your exam and working towards that, the only thing I ask of you is let us know before December 31st that you're going to stay in the hours-based piece. We're going to record it, and then we're here to continue to support you as you go through the next steps, which is exam. So really, it's just reporting to us that you're going to be going to stay in the hours-based program. You're completed. You can even submit the hours to us now if you'd like, if you've got them. If all the forms are completed, submit them to us. We'll keep them on file. You're good to go. So hopefully, Leia, that answers your question. Lorna is asking, just to clarify, IDER will replace CIDQ hours-based requirements for being eligible to take the NCIDQ exams. Yes. So the way things work between the exam and ARIDO, ARIDO is the actual jurisdictional body for Ontario, meaning to become a qualified interior designer in Ontario, ARIDO is actually the one that sets the requirements. CIDQ is the examination body. So we've actually presented IDER to CIDQ. We've been going back and forth with them since the summer. We've presented it to them. They're taking it back to their board and their team. They're asking questions of us. But the plan is that eventually, for Ontario, we are going to wean out, and this is much farther down the road. I would say this is like beyond 5 years. It could be a little longer than that, but eventually we're going to move to just IDER, especially when regulation kicks in, and that's a long-term kind of goal. But completing IDER will also qualify you to write the exams. As the jurisdictional body for Ontario, we actually tell NCIDQ or CIDQ who can write the exam. So if you are going to do IDER at some point, as we finalize these discussions with CIDQ, we'll have clear instructions for you as to if you've done IDER, how do you then apply for the exams once you're ready. But we're working in collaboration with CIDQ just to map out, is there a difference in the application process for the hours-based reporting versus IDER, and we're hashing that out with them, and then we'll have guidelines for you so that if you do decide to do IDER, you then know what's next as far as how do you apply to do the exams once you've completed your experience requirements. So Lorna, I hope that answers your question. Wen is asking, my question is if the new IDER is CIDQ approved. I kind of just answered that, Wen. So as soon as we finalize all of those collaboratory kind of conversations and we have clear guidelines, we'll release them to you. But really, CIDQ does not need to approve it. It's ARIDO who is the body that says our intern members have completed the requirement. They now can write the exam. And then CIDQ should be accepting you. So there really should be no issues with that. Again, we set the standards for what an interior designer is required to obtain. That is ARIDO's mandate as an organization. Leah is, how do we notify ARIDO on our decision? There is a link that was sent with the email that you would have gotten the notice of this event for. There's a link to a form. You actually just need to fill in the form. You get to pick your choice. It gets recorded to us. If you don't see that link in the email, just email us and we'll forward it off to you. But it should take you literally less than a minute to complete it once you have the link open. So it is an online submission form. And then Wen is asking, what if I recorded some of my hours, but I want to go to the new IDER? You absolutely, Wen, can do that. The key thing is, as I said earlier, sit down with your supervisor. I would go through all of the tasks, set up a meeting with them, go through all the tasks, open up that dialogue of where you both believe you have completed those tasks, identify which ones you both agree you've completed, and then have your supervisor sign off. If you have any prior or previous employers, that may mean you have to go back to them, right, and have that conversation with them. So that's just the one caveat to be cognizant of. But if you're with the same employer that you've been recording all of your hours with, I think it's really just one meeting. You start to review it, sign off in all of the areas that the supervisor agrees to. And then, as I said earlier, you've got now a clear kind of roadmap of where the gaps are, where you haven't had enough experience, or where you need to continue getting those tasks done. Elijah is asking, where and how can a student register for IDER? Also, is the supervisor work form that's filled up by the supervisor, does that have to be submitted after all the hours are completed or right after graduation? Again, Elijah, that online form that I mentioned, which was in the email, you just need to let us know if you're going to do IDER. You just let us know and we'll record it. Once you start your work experience, you just download the form. It is a PDF. It's on our website, and it's under interior design, how to become an interior designer. It's on the public side of the website. You just download it and start using it. And again, IDER is not hours-based, so it's really going to be based on tasks. If you wish to do the hours-based, then you would just start using the hours-based form instead. Ivanka is asking, I've been working in the industry for over 2 years, but joined ARIDO in January 2021. Am I required to follow the new IDER reporting system, or do I have options to choose? Ivanka, I would say, while we have said any new interns joining as of January 2021, we'd like you to move into IDER. I would say that really, for the most part, applies to recent graduates who are at the front end of their work experience. They're just starting, or they would have graduated in this past spring and really have had the last, I would say, 5 months of experience. So I would say you definitely have a choice, whatever you'd like to do. If you have 2 years of experience, you're most definitely then in the hours-based program. It might be easier for you to just continue on in that program. It's really up to you. Just report to us before December 31st, make a decision, report to us before the end of the year, and then we'll make a recording of that. We're not going to be really restrictive in that. So if some of you did join in early this year and want to continue with hours-based, we're okay with that. We're not going to be really stringent, but do let us know so that we can record it, and that way we could just monitor and support all of you as best as we can when you're reaching out to us and asking for guidance on supervised work experience. If we can then have a snapshot in your record of which one you've picked, it just helps us to support you when you're reaching out for guidance and asking questions for us. It just helps us to identify that quicker. Vin is asking, I'm also in the same boat as Ivanka. I've been approved by CIDQ to write the exam and wrote last month. Yeah, for you, Vin, I would say you're good to go. There's nothing for you to do. Your hours are done. You're already writing the exams. You're good to go. So I wouldn't worry about it at all. Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. And then the last question that's been submitted is by Daniel, and Daniel is asking where are the forms available, and are the reports filled out physically or emailed, or is there a digital submission platform? Great question. Because IDER has just launched their PDFs that are fillable, like digitally fillable. It's a fillable PDF. Once they're completely filled out, you finalize it and email it to us. Starting in January of 2022, we're actually going to be building a digital submission platform. So now that we kind of wanted to transition all of you first, figure out who's going where, right? But the plan for next year is that we are going to develop an online form where the same way you log into the ARIDO website to access your membership and to access all of the benefits that ARIDO has, the same place you register for events, this is actually going to be, you log in through the same link, so you're not going to have 10 different logins. It's one login for all of your ARIDO membership pieces, and then eventually, likely by next year, it'll be an online submission form, which you and possibly your employer too, if they're an ARIDO member, might be able to see. And then if your employer or supervisor is not an ARIDO member, if you're going to be filling it out on the platform next year, you'll be able to export it as a PDF, and then share it with your employer, get them to sign off, all of those great things. So hopefully that answers the question. You're welcome. So are there any other questions that anyone else has? Feel free. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Lorna. Hopefully this has been useful information. I really wanted to take time over these last 4 months to do these webinars and just let you know that we're here to support you. And we know that this can be intimidating, introducing something new, and that was never the intent. Isabel has just included one more question. What if we are not sure about previous hours? Can we send an email? Absolutely. Please stay in touch. We are here to support you throughout your entire career path, even once you're done your hours and you're moving on to exams. Our job is, think of us kind of as your counselors. We are here to connect all of the dots and support you. And our goal is that you're successful. So you're very welcome. So the key thing is communicating with us, staying in touch, and reaching out. And whenever you need guidance, you can either send us an email and ask us the question in the email and we'll respond. You can ask to set up a call with us and we can have a really quick chat over the phone with you. Sometimes those discussions, as you've probably learned from today, the more that we talk about it and draw these pieces out, the more we kind of understand them a little bit better. So we could also set up a call with you, set aside 30 minutes. We might have some questions for you to help guide you and also to help us understand fully your situation. But we're here to help, so don't ever hesitate to reach out. It's our purpose. We're here to support you. Any other questions? And feel free to unmute yourself and ask them verbally or raise your hands, whichever you prefer. Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hands, and I do not see anything else in the chat. So I am going to thank you all for participating. I really do hope you found this useful. Again, stay in touch. And one parting message, if you did find this useful, and as I said earlier, if you have any colleagues or friends that are also in the same boat as you and you think this would be useful for them, they can either attend the December session. So there's one more webinar next month. I think it's mid-month, so it's in a couple of weeks, or we have recorded this session. This recording will be available in about a week or so in the members section of the ARIDO website. So they've got those two options. And then also they could also reach out to us as well. Okay.